The woman who refused to stay buried. In a village tucked deep within the green folds of central Uganda, where the red earth stains the feet and the nights press close like a listening presence, there lived a woman whose name had long been swallowed by fear, until even the bravest mouths would only refer to her in hushed tones as that woman. She had once been known as Nalongo Namboga, a name spoken with ordinary familiarity, but over time it became a thing people avoided, as though saying it might summon her attention. Her hut stood at the far edge of the village, where the banana groves thickened into shadows, and the narrow footpaths curved away as if unwilling to lead directly to her door. Children were warned in low, serious voices not to wander near her compound, and even the dogs, creatures that bark at anything that breathes, would lower their heads and slink past her home without a sound. People spoke of small, unsettling things at first, the kind that could be dismissed if one tried hard enough. Chickens that wandered into her yard and never returned, goats that came back with dull, hollow eyes as though something inside them had been quietly removed, and the way her shadow sometimes seemed to move a moment too late, or in a direction that did not match her body. Yet for all the unease, no one dared confront her, because fear in such places does not rush forward recklessly. It settles into the bones and waits patiently for certainty. That certainty came the night the first child died, and it came in a way that left no room for comfort or explanation. A young boy named Cato, who had spent the day running through the village with laughter trailing behind him like a ribbon, was struck by a fever so sudden and fierce that his mother could only watch in helpless terror as his small body burned with a heat no water could cool. She held him through the night, whispering prayers, calling for elders and healers, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "Do something, please! He was fine! He was just fine!" But nothing touched the illness that gripped him. By the time dawn began to soften the sky, Cato lay still, his breathing gone as though it had been stolen rather than lost. The village gathered in mourning, but it was a cautious grief, the kind that keeps one eye open, because something about the way he died did not sit well in their spirits. When another child fell ill days later, and then another, each taken by the same sudden, unnatural fever, the quiet discomfort hardened into suspicion, and suspicion turned, as it often does, toward the one person they had never trusted to begin with. "She was seen near the well the day before the boy fell sick," one woman whispered, clutching her shawl tightly as if to shield herself from her own words, and another replied, "I saw her standing by the path at dusk, just watching, not speaking, just watching." And soon the murmurs wove themselves into a single, dangerous conclusion that none of them wanted to say aloud, but all of them believed. The gathering under the old mavule tree that evening carried a weight that pressed heavily on every shoulder present. As the men stood in a tight circle and the women hovered just behind them, their faces tense, their eyes sharp with fear and anger. One of the elders cleared his throat and spoke slowly, choosing each word as though it might decide the fate of more than just one person, saying, "This is not the kind of sickness that comes from the body. This is something that is being done, something that is being taken from us." And another man, his voice shaking with restrained fury, added, "Our children are dying, and we are standing here talking while she sits there as if nothing is happening." There was no formal trial, no careful weighing of evidence, because fear had already tipped the scale beyond balance, and when someone finally said, "Then we must end it," the words did not shock the group as much as they should have. They simply settled into the space like something that had been waiting to be spoken. When they walked toward Namboga's hut, they did so in silence, not out of calm, but because there is a certain kind of fear that steals even the comfort of noise. And when they arrived, they found her seated outside, as though she had been expecting them all along. She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze steady and unreadable, and said in a voice so calm it unsettled them more than anger ever could, "It took you longer than I thought it would," which caused a ripple of unease to pass through the group before one man stepped forward and said, "You have been taking our children, we know it, and it ends today." To which she responded with a faint, almost curious smile and asked, "If I truly had that power, do you think I would still be sitting here among you, waiting?" Her answer did nothing to calm them, because it was not the words that frightened them. It was the way her eyes seemed to hold something deeper, something that did not match the simplicity of her voice. And so the decision was made not through logic, but through the overwhelming need to act before more was lost. "She must be buried," someone said, and another voice, colder, more certain, added, "Alive, so whatever is in her cannot escape." And though the word alive hung heavily in the air, thick with a kind of dread that should have stopped them, no one spoke against it. They dug the pit just beyond her compound, the red soil giving way easily beneath their shovels as though the earth itself offered no resistance. And when they brought her forward, binding her hands despite her lack of struggle, she walked without resistance, her bare feet pressing into the ground with quiet finality. As they lowered her into the pit, she lay on her back and looked up at them, her face lit by the last of the evening light, and said softly, "You believe this will protect you, but you do not understand what you are doing." And one of the men, unable to meet her gaze, snapped back, "We understand enough, and it is enough to stop you." Yet even as he spoke, his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. The first shovel of dirt fell onto her, then another, and another, each one dulling the sound of her breathing until it became a muffled struggle beneath the soil. And just before the last of her voice was swallowed completely, she said something that would later echo in every mind that had been present. "You will hear me again." And then there was only silence, thick and complete, as the earth closed over her and the villagers stepped back, trying to convince themselves that what they had done was necessary.
If you're drawn to stories where history meets mystery, where the wind carries more than just dust, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Pearl Mystic Tales for powerful African legends, untold histories, and stories that linger long after the screen goes dark.
For several days after her burial, the village seemed to exhale, as though a pressure that had been building for weeks had finally been released, and people allowed themselves, cautiously at first, to believe that the danger had passed. There were no new fevers, no sudden deaths, and the nights, though still dark, did not feel as heavy, and children once again played near the paths they had avoided. "Maybe it is over," one woman said quietly, as she watched her daughter laugh, and another nodded, though her eyes remained wary, replying, "It must be, it has to be," as if saying it aloud would make it true. But on the seventh night, when the moon hung low and the air carried a strange stillness that seemed to press against the skin, the dogs began to bark in a way that did not sound like warning, but like fear, sharp and desperate, as though they were trying to chase away something they could not see. A man named Samanda woke to a faint scratching sound outside his hut, a slow, deliberate noise that seemed too steady to be an animal, and as he sat up, listening, he called out cautiously, "Who is there?" But the sound did not stop. It continued, rhythmic and patient, as though it had all the time in the world. He rose, took his lantern, and stepped outside, the small flame trembling as much as his hand. And as he moved closer to the source of the sound, he realized, with a growing sense of dread, that it was not coming from the bushes or the trees, but from the ground itself. He stood there, staring, as the soil before him began to shift, not violently, not dramatically, but subtly, as though something beneath it was testing the boundary between stillness and movement. And before he could step back, a hand broke through the earth, fingers clawing upward, the skin torn and caked with dirt, the nails split and bleeding. Samanda let out a choked cry and stumbled backward, dropping the lantern, its light spilling across the ground and illuminating the shape that followed. A face pushing through the soil, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth opening to release a breath that sounded like it had been dragged from somewhere deep and suffocating. It was Namboga, but not as she had been, her features twisted by something that was no longer entirely human, her skin stretched and broken, her teeth packed with dirt, as though the earth itself had tried to silence her, and failed. She pulled herself free, slowly, each movement deliberate, as if she were remembering how to use a body that had already begun to belong to something else. And when she finally stood, she turned her gaze toward him, and in a voice that sounded both hollow and full at the same time, she said, "Did you think I would stay where you put me?" And then she smiled, a slow, unnatural curve of the lips that did not reach her eyes. By morning, Samanda was dead, found inside his hut with no wounds, no signs of struggle, his body intact but his expression empty, as though whatever made him who he was had been carefully removed, leaving behind only the shape of a man. The village gathered once more, but this time there was no debate, no argument, only a shared understanding that settled over them like a heavy fog. "We buried her," one man said quietly, his voice thick with realization, and another responded, "No, we did not bury her. We woke something we cannot put back." And the truth of those words spread through them with a cold certainty. The nights that followed became a slow unraveling of everything they thought they understood, as people began to hear her moving outside their homes, a dragging, uneven sound that circled their huts, sometimes stopping just beyond the door as though she stood there listening. Children woke screaming, describing a woman with dirt in her mouth, calling their names in a voice that sounded like it came from beneath the ground. And even the elders, who had faced many things in their lives, refused to step outside after sunset, their confidence replaced by a quiet, trembling caution. "She is not alive," one whispered to another, "but she is not dead either." And there was no answer to that, because whatever she had become did not fit into the understanding they had relied on. On the final night, the village woke not to scratching, but to laughter, low and broken, echoing through the air as though it came from every direction at once. And as people rushed out of their huts, drawn together by fear stronger than their desire to hide, they saw her, standing among them, no longer at the edge, no longer hidden, but fully present, her body straighter, her movements more certain, as though whatever had taken hold of her had now settled comfortably within its new form. She looked at them, one by one, her gaze lingering on each face as if recalling the moment they had stood above her grave. And when she spoke, her voice carried a depth that seemed to come from far below the surface of the world, saying, "You buried me because you were afraid, and now you will understand what it means to be followed by that fear." And one man, his courage breaking through his terror for a brief moment, shouted, "What are you?" To which she tilted her head slightly and replied, "I am what you made when you chose to bury a living soul and call it justice." And as the wind fell still and the fires around them flickered out one by one, the village realized too late that they had not ended anything at all. They had simply transformed it into something far worse. They say that place still exists, though no one lives there anymore, the huts long collapsed, the paths overgrown, and the silence so complete it feels unnatural, as though even the birds and animals have chosen to avoid it. Travelers who pass nearby do so quickly, keeping their eyes forward, because sometimes, if the night is deep enough and the wind is just right, a faint scratching can still be heard beneath the ground, slow and patient, as if something is either trying to rise again or, perhaps more unsettling, trying to pull something else down with it. And those who have heard it never linger long enough to find out which.